And Chimwiini is the language, again, of the town, and it's used in official business of the town as well as, or was used as official business of the town as well as in public spheres, like at the market and things like that. In fact, one of the main historical reasons for the connection between the Shangamas and the rest of Brava is for economic reasons. So the Tunis would come from the interior, bringing daily agricultural goods, milk, things like that, to market. And so knowing Chimwiini was necessary for having that kind of economy. Very interesting about Brava is that the town, since at least the 16th century, there's evidence, and probably much earlier than that the town has always been ruled by a council of elders of all the 7 clans. And so even though the Hatimi and Bida are considered to be the sort of Barawa proper, they're the native Chimwiini speakers, and they live in the city center, the Tuni have always had an equal share in the governing of the town. This wasn't the case in other Swahili city-states where you had a kind of kingship legacy developing, and in some of them it sort of turned into even something like a dynasty. That never happened in Brava. It was always has been ruled by a council of elders of all the clans. As we'll talk about in a little bit today, most Bravanese live in refugee communities around the world, but they still carry this on as much as possible. And so, for instance, when I spent some time in Columbus, Ohio, where there are a couple thousand Bravanese, there was a fight there at a wedding, and a council of the elders had to be called to decide what to do with this. So whoever is sort of the most senior representative of all the 7 clans had to get together to talk about what to do about this. So I've actually never seen people so quick to pick up their cell phones and call London or wherever as the Bravanese are when there's something that needs to be discussed by elders from the 7 clans. They still try to carry this on. So what happened to the Swahili city-states? Well, Europeans showed up. In particular, the Portuguese get there in the 16th century and are very interested in ruling the maritime commerce in the area. So they destroy this distance trading economy that the Swahili have with southern Arabian Peninsula and India. But another thing happens as well that's unrelated to that, and that is the Somaliization of the northern coast, the Benadir coast, as it's known here. And what happens is Cushitic pastoralists who have been in the interior push out to the coast and push the Swahili southward, push the Swahili out of there. It's a gradual process, not necessarily a violent process as far as we understand it, but just a kind of gradual displacement. But interestingly, that didn't happen at Brava. It happened at Mogadishu. You don't have any version of Swahili being spoken in Mogadishu or in Merka, which are 2 Swahili states, former Swahili city-states there. But it doesn't happen at Brava. Brava remains. And so as a result, it becomes highly isolated, of course, from other Swahili states. Still some limited interaction with Mombasa, somewhat Zanzibar. But a high degree of Somali bilingualism results in Brava. But that seems to happen pretty early on, and yet there's never the shift to Somali. There's a very high level of comfort with being bilingual in Chimwiini and Somali, and many people maintain Chimwiini monolingualism as well during this time. So that to me this is the most interesting time to me to think about is why is it that Mogadishu and Merka were sort of overtaken by the Cushitic culture and language that was moving in, but Brava was not and remained a Swahili state. The answer to that, I think, is probably a complex one, but I've identified some stabilizing factors that I think probably played a role here. And again, this just comes from well, research, but also just talking to people about getting a better picture of what life in Brava has been like. I think maybe one factor was economic value of Brava as a community of artisans, traders, and in particular Islamic educational centers. There was a very strong tradition starting in the 17th century up to the 19th century of qadis in Brava, of interpreters of Quranic jurisprudence, schools of Quranic thought growing there, and people even came to Brava to be educated in Islam. that kind of self-sufficient economy that I was talking about before, that symbiotic relationship. I've been amazed in talking to people at how little it seems that Brava needed to import and how much they actually produced right there in Brava. Cultural differentiation, probably a huge factor here. Bravanese people are highly, of course it's very obvious to them that they're different from the other cultures surrounding them. They place a high value on their language and on their particular culture and history. There's a lot of pride in being Bravanese, and probably that was a big factor. But also there are some physical factors that I think probably played a role here. One is that highly organized city structure that I was talking about before, with the surrounding, the city almost completely surrounded by a fairly high wall on 3 sides, not on the ocean side, but on the other 3 sides. And then some pretty high dunes that form a natural barrier between the town and the rest of the interior. And then lack of safe passage to other major cities overland, even as late as 1900 or so. This is when the Italians were the colonial power in Somalia. They talk about the fact that there's just no safe way to get between Mogadishu and Brava. You really got to go by boat. And so all of these things kind of work together to make Brava a very nice place to visit if you can get there, right? And so it gives it a certain degree of isolation, I think. And this last one, I think, was also probably very important, and it's pointed out by Vianello and Qasim, that there seems to be no safe anchorage for larger ships. And that makes Brava different from Mogadishu and Merka, which were major ports for major ships. And so when the British and American trading ships came, as well as later the Italian ships, they didn't find a safe port at Brava, and so they weren't able to establish company trade houses there. They weren't able to establish themselves there ever really in a strong way like they were in the other towns. And so I think that probably also was a major contributor to Bravanese comparative isolation. Here's just a picture which I robbed from one of the Bravanese websites. But it's a nice picture because you can see the white coral rag buildings in the middle, but you can also see, this is facing the interior, you can see those big dunes in the background, those big sand dunes that are back there. Okay, so what happened to Chimwiini to make it a highly endangered language today? Well, what happened was politics. And so in 1969, we have Siad Barre becomes the president of Somalia under a military coup. And he seeks to usher in scientific socialism, and especially to eradicate what he saw and what many saw as the major problem for Somalia, which is clanism. Being part of a particular clan and what clan you belong to and what subfamily in the clan you belong to is a very big deal in Somali culture. It's one of the first things you meet someone. Two Somalis meet each other, they want to know what clan are you from. They saw this as the major problem for national unity in Somalia. And very early on, one of the major campaigns in eradicating clanism was to make Somali the official language of the nation, introduce a standard Latin orthography, and give everybody 6 months to learn it. It was decreed. 6 months from now, everyone in schools and governments must know how to write and read standard Somali. So from 1973 on, it starts getting taught in schools, and schools are taught in Somali. And this includes the schools in Brava. So for the first time, Somali, although many people were already bilingual in Somali and Brava, for the first time Somali gets a kind of official status, and now it's being used in the schools.